Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have an amazing and special show coming right up. Our guest today is Kumu Ramsay Taum, and he's here today to talk to us about unity in diversity. Now, Kumu Ramsay is the founder and president of the Hawaiian-based Life Enhancement Institute of the Pacific. He has been a student of many ancient Hawaiian teachers, and he personally teaches on topics including the 5 pillars of Aloha, Ho'oponopono, the Hawaiian process of stress release, and making things right. Kumu Ramsay is a regular guest at many Unity churches to speak on such topics, including the one we're going to be talking about, Unity in Diversity. So let's welcome to the show Kumu Ramsay.
Well, thank you for having me back. It's been a while. Thanks so much.
Well, I think anytime we get together and you're able to share your insights is the perfect time. In fact, I can't wait for us. I know we're going to be doing this for a few months in a row here, and I just can't wait to get involved in this conversation with you.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, Marianne. I think it's timely. And there's so much to explore these days. You know, the world is doing some interesting things. So the outer world and connecting with the inner world. So I guess this is a good time to do it.
Well, I just listened to, you did a talk at Unity Church in Hawaii, and yes. I heard how you were talking about unity in diversity and how it related to just the ecosystem on the reef. And I found that to be absolutely fascinating. The parallels were, it was easy to see how these parallels would work for us. But, sometimes I guess humans tend to ignore those kind of things.
Yeah, I was sharing the observation or my observations and the things I've learned from the elders here about that ecosystem, about nature, and how we have somehow imposed upon it this notion of being wild. Mm-hmm. That when you go into the wilderness, a forest, a jungle, or even the ocean, that it is wild and we are not. And in actuality, I think if we explore it and observe it more closely, it's probably a lot more organized than we think it is. And we actually introduce a wild factor to it. Mm-hmm. And so when the group came to me to explore some of the diversity challenges, which they called diversity challenges, in contemplating it more, I began to recognize that really it wasn't so much about wanting to seek diversity or understand diversity, but it was really about seeking unity. And what struck me was that we tend to go to that place about diversity in the interest of saying, how do we work together, right? Mm-hmm. What is the whole? And that's just one way of defining the whole, the unity, if you would. And in this case, I liken the situation to a healthy reef system. So the concept of lokahi in Hawaiian, lokahi, refers to the notion of unity, solidarity, working together. And I think I've mentioned in previous conversations that the Hawaiian language is an elemental language. Mm-hmm. And the root words to the primary words themselves are empowered by spirit. And they're empowered in each of their roots. So when you put them together, you're really calling upon and beginning to, vibrate. It's mm-hmm. vibratory. So the word lokahi is several words, but the two primary words, the first word lo, which is a derivative of another word, alo, which you hear in the word aloha, refers to the notion of being connected face to face, eye to eye, nose to nose, to be in the face of something. That's the connector. The word kahi refers to a singularity, as in one. But at the deeper level, it refers not to anyone, but it refers to the one, meaning the one spirit, the one creative energy, the one mind. And so when one speaks to the concept of lokahi, you're talking about the unification of all things, which then Hawaiians would call pono. And we've had the conversation about ho'oponopono previously.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting enough, what this group is really looking for is pono, this idea of harmony, balance, and ultimately peace. But we tend to look for everything to be the same, this homogenized community. And so diversity, when things are all mixed up, tends to fracture that view, that vision, and we try to make sense of it. So I point to the reef, a healthy reef, as a good example of a system that's operating by diversity. Not everyone is a shark. Not everyone is a fish or a coral or a limu, seaweed, if you would. So that's kind of where the conversation started, and we kind of explored what it would be like if we were living in a healthy reef system and being more lokahi. And so it was quite an interesting experience. What did you get from it?
Well, I was real impressed when you talked about just the word diversity itself, how it is just seeped in separation. And so in order to bring together people of either diversity or people who are having thoughts that are not in unity with one another, using the word diversity already talks about being separated. So how is it possible to bring us together when we're using language that is just kind of moving the separation even further, I think, in some ways?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? Is the idea that I think there's a term for it, implicit bias, is when we are already biased by the words and the language that we're using. So we don't even realize that we're infecting the very conversation that we're in for the purpose of healing with the seeds of dis-ease by the very words we're using. Diversity in of itself is really a state of being different. It's a word or it's a concept that identifies multiformity or varieties of things. So if the intent is actually to work together, then why do we want to start out a conversation about being separate? And it's one of those things, because we're so caught up in that approach. And forgive me if I repeat myself, but I think I mentioned once before, it's like bringing an elephant in the room and then trying to spend the rest of the day getting him out. We start out with a particular topic or program or problem solving or conflict resolution. And we use terms like diversity, which carry their own baggage, their own weight. So what we end up doing is starting with one elephant. But if there are 50 people in the room, we really are starting with 50 elephants. So we start with a herd, because everyone has their own issues with the term. And then we discover we have issues with the term the next guy has, our neighbor, the person next to us, and the person across from us, and the person across from them. And so what starts out as 50 elephants then becomes 1,000.
Yeah.
And that is the challenge, is really finding what is that one common thing. So my observation on the reef is that how then do all of these diverse creatures, again, you have the the crabs, the crawlers, the swimmers, the floaters, these large predators, and yet you have these other very calm animals all sharing this space. And there's really nobody managing it. It's not like there's a reef manager that stands there and tells one fish to go to the right and another one to the left, and you stop, you go, and there's no one managing that. They're managing themselves. And to me, that looks a lot like respect.
Yeah,
I'm going to respect the shark. I'm going to respect that rock, and but it also suggests that everyone knows their place, and respects the place of others. So I felt the lokahi, the lessons from the reef, is a good example, or at least one place for us to explore diversity. And of course, with our country the way it is very much like that, the diversity, and how do we come together to create what we like to say united. How do we do that?
Well, and you had talked in the discussion, and I hope I don't butcher your quote, but you said that diversity is really talking about how to get together when the words are all about separation. And what we're looking for is respect the differences, but honor the similarities and build on that.
Yeah. I'd like to suggest that similar is not same. And yet, it's in those similarities that we find common space, right? I think it's easy to identify things that are different. But when you share a space, share resources, share spirit, what we're looking at is similarities. We're all human. We all need air. We all need water. We all need those natural things that keep us alive. We all need love. We all need community. These are the things that makes us common. And it is in those similarities that we find the opportunity to come together. But the diversity component says, like the human organ, the body itself, not every organ is a heart, nor is every organ a liver or a kidney. That our very human existence, our being, relies on diversity. The fact that everyone and everything is working together in harmony. And when it is not working in harmony, that's when we begin to experience what we know as disease. The dis-ease, the discomfort, is a result of the disconnect, which is occurring between these diverse organs, if you would, that are no longer working in harmony. And so when we look to a healthy community, a healthy family, I don't think we find that everyone is the same, but instead somehow benefiting from the strengths as well as the weaknesses of those around us. Finding the need and fill it, as some would say. Bringing your strength to a community where there is a weakness.
Yeah.
And not trying to make everyone like you. So that's the part that I suggest, or think diversity then becomes the underpinning of how well we are in unity, working together, hand in hand, closely respecting the fact that what I bring to the table is different from what someone else brings to the table. And if we do this well, we feed everyone.
Well, and I like how you talked about the yellowfish on the reef. If we're all looking for the yellowfish, and then that's kind of what we're all seeing. But if the yellowfish is not there, then it's just kind of just how we would miss it. It's just not. It's having kind of a hole in that diversity.
Yeah, and I think it demonstrates that if we're not careful, what started out as a preference could easily become a prejudice. Right?
Yeah, that's actually really good.
Right? Because you start prejudging things. When it started out, I prefer yellow, but not at the expense of red. or not at the expense of blue, or that every morning I wake up that the rainbow is no longer a series of colors, but just yellow. So I think that's the challenge. It doesn't mean that I don't like other colors, but when you start eliminating other colors for the preference of one, that's when we start beginning to experience what we consider the negative impacts of discernment, which we've now called discrimination and prejudice. We become prejudgmental, prejudicial, discriminatory. And oftentimes that is really a reflection of fear more so than it is of faith. We become fearful of those things that we don't recognize, or we become fearful of those things that don't fit the color palette that we've become accustomed.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting phenomenon. Sometimes we don't even realize why we're not seeing the red or the blue when it's really there all the time.
Well, and how boring would the reef be if it was all one color?
Precisely.
It's this beautiful dance, this harmonious dance that happens between all these creatures and colors, and it's what makes it so spectacular. Yeah.
What's interesting is that some of the best fish to eat from the reef that provide us with nutrition are silverfish, whitefish. They're silver, and they don't have those really bright colors. And yet very few people have fish tanks or aquariums with just silver fish in them. And yet that's the one fish that provides them with nutrition. There's something about the colors, there's something about that diversity that appeals to us. And I think it is nature's way of showing us what is healthy. A rainbow with multiple colors, a forest with multiple colors, a reef with multiple colors. I think it's one of those natural indicators of health. Nutritionists will point to that, saying that if you want a healthy meal, look at the colors on your plate. You should have different colors, the oranges, the greens, the browns, and a number of things. And then it's a management of how much of each color you have that begins to provide you with a balanced meal. So if there's anything to that relationship, then when we look around us in our communities, in our classrooms, in our offices, in our temples, whatever it is, are there a diversity of color? Well, and I'm not just talking about skin color. I'm talking about the colors of thought, the color of emotion, the color of expression, and the way we color our speech. All of those things. Because in the absence of that, then everything becomes vanilla, or everything becomes bland. It becomes one flavor, which, as you said, wouldn't be so exciting and may ultimately become very boring.
Well, I think the reef has it right, and there's definitely a lesson there that we can walk away from, and you've pointed out so eloquently on how this harmony takes place without people, or there's not one fish slapping around sharks, and there's not, it's it's all, you don't see an eel, just kind of taking on a bunch of fish. I mean, there's this unity that happens and harmony that happens within this ecosystem.
Yeah, again, I think it's this notion that everything understands its place. Mm-hmm. In Hawaiian, we say kuleana. The concept of kuleana speaks about responsibility and obligation, but it also speaks about relationship. And so one's relationship and the responsibility you have to others, if you live up to those relationships, then you, as well as everyone else, begin to enjoy certain privileges as well as opportunity. Mm-hmm. They go hand in hand. And I think that's the key. It's understanding that each of us has a gift. And sometimes that gift is really to receive the gift of others, giving them the opportunity to express their gifts. versus thinking that we're the smartest guy in the room all the time, or that we have the gifts for everyone, that we are the sole source of everyone else's prosperity, happiness, or success. And it's not just individual people, but it could be individual cultures as well, where one particular culture group believes it has all the answers, or a particular political group, or a political, religious group. Mm-hmm. While they may use unity as the reason for what they're doing, to a certain degree, they're saying there's only one, and that's us. And I think that's where it becomes very challenging.
Yeah.
So like the reef, I think the yellowfish recognizes that the eel is the eel, and the eel recognizes the shark is the shark. And while any one of them may believe that they're running things, everyone else is willing to let them think that. Said, okay, yeah, fine. Just keep doing what you're doing. I'll do what I'm doing, and you're in control. Thank you very much.
It's like, yeah.
So I think it's that. But it's when we begin to collude, so when we begin to come together to manipulate those spaces, predicated on the yellows working together, or the reds working together, or whatever. I think that's when we begin to see that disconnect. And we tend to use words and principles and concepts as unity as an excuse for our behavior. And I think most of us seen is what has happened when we do that. Today we can look at the reef because we, as the consumers of the products of the reef, have created reefs that no longer reflect that health. We've taken the yellows. They're now in our fish tanks. We've taken the greens and the blues, and we put them in our aquariums. And many reefs now are just gray, because they no longer have the life that's once was there. Mm-hmm. And I think we do that to people. We do that to our community as well. When our preferences lead to selective processes that begin to separate rather than blend, it's a fine line we walk.
Well, and I think there's just a bigger lesson to be learned from just even looking at simple things like the reef and how this brings everything together. What are some of the ways that we can pull and bring more harmony into not just our lives, but within our communities?
One, I think it's acknowledging that as communities, and I'm going to liken it to a canoe, only because we like that metaphor as ocean people, island people.
Yeah.
But, in a canoe, everyone has to be paddling in the same direction, or you end up going nowhere. And it's not in our best interest to throw people out of a canoe at any point in time, because it means more work for everyone. And we may or may not get there as a result. So communities, looking at the root word commune, how do you begin to commune? Or are communities today just places that we reside in? Or do we really live there? Mm-hmm. And I think part of it is getting to understand that. What is the purpose of the community? How does it function? And why am I part of it? Or why would I move there? Or why would I become a contributor to that? Or am I a contributor or just a taker? One of the lessons that we talked about in this exploration of the reef was this notion of half full, half empty. I think most of us have heard and seen that example of a glass that is full or half empty. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we look at our communities that way. And I think the object is to look at the glass and recognize that another way to look at it, as one person said, is a glass is half full or half empty is really dependent upon whether you're pouring or you're drinking. It's still how you relate to that thing. What do you expect of it? So that shift in thinking, are you drinking or are you pouring, can then be extended to the idea, are you giving or are you taking? Right?
Yeah.
And what is your contribution? So it's easy to judge or assess the class when we're not engaged in it. But when we're part of it, when I'm participating in that, what am I doing? Am I taking more than I'm giving? And so the underlying principle for us is aloha, this concept of giving and receiving. And in that giving and receiving, hopefully we find balance. And if a community is going to find balance, if the community wants to be a healthy community, then at some point in time it's looking for balance, which I would define more along the lines of a reef again, of equilibrium, rather than everything being the same, equal all the time. There's a tendency for us to think balance means equal only because of our mathematics, meaning that if you have 5 pounds, I have 5 pounds. You have 10 feet, I have 10 feet. But equilibrium on the reef is not like that, nor is it in nature, at least from what I understand of nature, is that it's constantly shifting. And the balance is maintained because everyone is shifting in order to maintain that balance. So as you move farther to the right and begin to tip the bar, I'll move a little farther to the left to bring balance to the center. As you move towards the center, I move towards the center. And that's the expression of relationships. And a community is really an expression of our relationships. And so lessons of the reef and diversity is really the overall discussion at the community level of rethinking our relationships and recognizing that they're not just transactions at the store, but they are relationships of neighbors, of family members. So redefining that is that this is not a transaction. It's a relationship. And while many people negotiate in those relationships, it's still at the end of the day a measurement of one's relationships, not the number of transactions we have.
And I think there's this erroneous view that have things in harmony, that how we're saying everything has to be equal, which sometimes there's a little bit more give in some areas and a little bit more take in others.
That's right. I had an elder tell me once, he said, balance is about giving back or giving in full measure. And I wasn't quite sure what he meant at first, to give in full measure. And it's kind of talking about this notion of equilibrium. A good example here is the water that hits the mountain range behind my home is called the Ko'olaus. And that mountain range, water will hit the peak and will percolate into our aquifer. And the Board of Water Supply says it takes anywhere between 20 and 25 years, depending on where you are in that range, for that water to percolate into our aquifers, which we then, of course, tap for our drinking water. So if you and I are drinking water of that aquifer, one glass of water, we are now drinking water that's 25 years old or older. So there's an investment in nature in us of 25 years, which we will drink in a second. So how do we bring balance back to that? So if I were to put water back into the ground, what would I need to do? And to give back in full measure needs to understand what we're taking from that. And as a community, we need to know, what are we taking out of our community? What are we taking out of people? What do we demand from them? And how do we recharge them so that they can continue this exchange, this relationship? So in the same way that we recharge an aquifer with more water, we also create barriers to that recharge. So we put cement on the ground and create impermeable surfaces. And so nature, the way it is, oversimplification, you have 1/3 of the water will evaporate, 1/3 of the water will run off, and another third will go into the ground, which we then drink. So simply put, giving back in full measure means I can't just put one glass of water back into the earth. I have to put 3 glasses of water back into the earth. You see? Because I am just taking a part of it. But if I just keep taking and don't put anything back, ultimately there will be nothing for me or anyone else. And so community is the same way. If we keep taking from one another without recharging and putting things back in full measure, then every day we are tearing a piece of the page that is never glued back. And at the end of the day, there's no page. You know, we just keep ripping a page from the community book every day. I think, though, that's part of it. It's acknowledging that we give back in full measure. And then begin to recognize that the person next to us may not be as attuned to that.
Yeah.
And so how do we give for them, right? Therefore, equilibrium, not balance. I may be giving more today than I did yesterday because someone else was in greater need today than I was. And hopefully, when I'm in that situation, there will be someone else who has the capacity to carry me and or those in need like that. And that's the respect. That's the acknowledgement. That's the knowing that I believe is occurring on the reef that is healthy.
Well, I think with all of, and just kind of an example, with all the different hurricanes that have been hitting the U.S., I mean, there is a certain amount of, people that are doing without. And so, of course, there's a certain amount of people who are giving, and so you could see that give and take because of the, not just because of the tragedy that's going on, but out of, I believe, in some part, human nature, where people really want to do something to help somebody.
Yeah, there's always an opportunity for that, isn't there? Mm-hmm. I don't think we have to look very far for these opportunities. Yes, there are things going on in Puerto Rico and other places in our own country, in Texas and Louisiana and all these other.
Yeah.
But that's happening in every community. The hurricane this time was a very visible one, but I think hurricanes are happening every day in people's lives. The pressures are changing. Their homes are being lost. Jobs are being, replaced. We could find the hurricanes in every community. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the pain or the discomfort requires more attention because more people are experiencing it. The pain of one is equal to the pain of a million. It's still pain.
Yeah.
Right? The discomfort. So I think it's nice and it's great. It's important for us to be able to respond to these large communities that are in need. But there are also very small communities that are in need constantly. Not just because we had a hurricane recently, but they're living through hurricanes constantly. And somehow we need to temper our lenses so that, like you said earlier, we're just not looking for the yellow fish in trouble, but the other fish too.
Yeah, that is so true. I mean, they still have children across the U.S. that go to school hungry every day, that don't get a meal. So, I mean, there's lots of different hurricanes that are happening within our communities across the country and just right where we live. What are some of the ways that you would say that people could be more involved or show up more within their communities to help?
Well, it's funny you say that because I had a conversation yesterday morning with another group who are real interested in things like this. And I think it's letting people know you're available, volunteering. And I don't necessarily mean you have to go down to a particular shelter or a place to volunteer, but volunteering your soul and spirit and your mind to say that I am in the right place at the right time for my good and for the good of others. Waking up and being able to say something like that begins to align us with the universe in such a way that those in need, those in trouble, will somehow align with you in your life so that if you're truly in a position to assist them, they will cross your path, or you will cross theirs. And so while there are some conscious ways of saying, yes, I'm going to volunteer down at the shelter this week or every month for 3 hours, it's a very, intentionful way, mindful way of doing it. There's also other ways of just basically making yourself available and letting the cosmos know that you're prepared and ready, and that you're willing to assist. And again, assisting one assists all, because it means that that's one less person that everyone else has to be concerned about. And it'll be interesting if each and every one of us just committed ourselves to one other person in need, or assisted them. Imagine what would happen, And it's just one. And we already have thousands, if not thousands upon thousands, who are in need. In Hawaii alone, we have nearly 8,000 homeless. The homeless camp is one of the largest areas in the country right now.
Yeah.
They're on our doorsteps. They're right in front of us. They're in front of our businesses. They're on our highways. And at the same time, we have groups that are putting food packages and clothing, together to send to a foreign destination in need. As good as that is, you have to ask ourselves, what are we doing? It's right in front of us.
Mm-hmm. It's like, how are we helping the people within our community, especially when there's that high a population of homeless? It's like, what are we doing to help not just solve the problem, but look at what it is that's being, what's going on within the community that's causing that.
Yeah, I mean, you those words are very important, how you phrase them, solving the problem. In many cases, we're just dealing with the symptoms. Mm-hmm. And that's also part of the problem, right? It's how we define these things. So what we're seeing on the street is a symptom of something much deeper. And feeding them today is not going to solve the problem. It'll address one of the symptoms. And I don't think I'm being Pollyannish about this. There are clearly individuals on the street who are houseless, mm-hmm. who consider themselves at home there. And so our preference for them to be in a home or a house overrides their preference to be on the street. So what happens? Do I force them into a house? Right. So there are people who have made choices, despite the fact that it may make us uncomfortable about their choices. There are those who are heavily medicated, mm-hmm. And there's not much we can do. So there's mental health issues and things like that. But then there are those who are families, who are working families, who just aren't making ends meet. And many of these homeless that we're referring to are children. And what's interesting is that in many cases I've been through or seen the communities of houseless, and these children are laughing, they're playing, they're happy on the exterior. But I've also seen other children in homes who are not as happy, who are not smiling. So something else is going on there. What is that? There's a different spirit. And imagine what happens when that spirit is actually protected with a proper home, etc. Mm-hmm. So they're balancing factors here. There's no question about it. It's not that we're going to pull everyone off the street.
Yeah.
But I think it's about creating opportunity, right, and recognizing, but not putting up blinders because we think that they all are helpless or don't want our help. There is a large number of them. That is the case. But there's still so many that could, just by one person reaching out, could make the difference for them and their children. So, like the reef, it's not all sharks,
Yeah. It's interesting what small things can make a difference. And I know, and this is actually, I couldn't stop laughing when you talked about this in your, I'm just kind of switching topics here, when you talked mm-hmm, about this mm-hmm. in your discussion with the Unity Church about if everyone just had a thumb.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. You look at our hand, the diversity in your hand is what makes it functional. Mm-hmm. Every finger has a purpose, but too many of us want to be thumbs.
It's better than
we know what happens
when
we're all thumbs, right?
Yeah, it's interesting, but and you also talked about, I think we kind of feel this in different places across the country too, because I hear you talk about how Hawaii is referred to as a melting pot. And I know San Francisco's been dubbed that, and parts of LA, and I'm sure New York. So you've got all these places where these great communities have come together. And I loved how you talked about it not being a melting pot.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and again, it goes back to our upbringing, right? It goes back to supply side thought. I suggested these are the ideas and thoughts that we become accustomed to, not really acknowledging where they come from, right? Or what their origins are, what they really mean. So for me, a melting pot, kind of looks to the process of taking metals and putting them together in a pot and melting it all down from a ring back to its, liquid state, and then making something else out of it. That's the melting pot concept. And every time I've looked at a melting pot, it just looks gray, or silver. Everything loses its color. So regardless of what you do, you throw it in there and it just kind of gets really bland. That's not Hawaii. Hawaii is not a very bland place. It's very colorful. Its foods are colorful. Our environment is colorful. The people are colorful. So I tend to think calling us a melting pot is a misnomer. Instead, however, I do think Hawaii, and perhaps even places like San Francisco and others, where we're attracting people from all over the planet, all over island Earth, to these places. We are more like a beef stew, a beef stew. And because for me, beef stew, a good beef stew anyway, is like a reef. It has all these different things. You have the meat, you have the carrots, the potatoes, the celeries. And when you put them together and add a little heat, you create a gravy. And it's that gravy, that flavor, which I call community, and I think that's the critical component, the difference between the melting pot. So yeah, we're more like a beef stew than we are like a melting pot. And every community, some people put more beef in theirs than others. Some people might even put chicken in it, which is now called chicken stew. But whatever your tastes may require or prefer, at the end of the day, it's the gravy, And the gravy just says, I've given a part of me, but I haven't given all of me. I haven't lost myself in the beef stew of my community. So I can look at the beef stew, I see the piece of beef, I see the potato, I see the carrot, I see all the things there, but I also get to enjoy the gravy. And I think it would be neat if communities could behave more like beef stew.
I would agree, because you can still see diversity, and it's not a bunch of slop, it's not just like something that's been so blanded together you don't know what it is. And that's what makes things so spicy in life, is having those unique pieces that come together.
Yeah. Oh, Marianne, you're making me hungry now. It's one of the biggest things that's going on across the country is culinary arts, right? The notion of food. And interesting enough, I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to that. We all need to eat, right? And that's the one common thing, going back to an earlier comment earlier. That's one of those common things. We all need food, and we have different tastes and different flavors. But we all need food. So it's interesting how people can gather around and actually find community around food. So that's a good observation.
It's when people really do come together. Mealtime is kind of a thing where people do come together. And,
that's right.
And it was really interesting. I've heard you talk about the difference between hi and aloha.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be great if you could expound on that for our listeners, because I just really appreciated the discussion you've had on that.
Yeah, aloha is, I don't know that you can go anywhere on the planet anymore, island Earth, without hearing the word aloha. Or if you ask someone aloha, they'll tend to recognize it has to do with Hawaii. Mm-hmm. But that's because it is being used as a slogan and as a sign, and at a very marketing level, aloha is said to be hi, hello, mm-hmm. as a simple greeting, if you would. But aloha is actually much deeper than that. As I mentioned earlier, the elemental spiritual part of our language. So alo, the term again, means to be in one's face, to be in the spirit. But the first letter a refers to something much bigger. That's as in divine, the God heat energy that gives us all life, as in Ra and La and Allah and Ata and Yahweh. This a energy. So that's captured in that first word, a. Alo, to be joined with that to be connected, to be in the face, or to face God, to face that heat energy. The second and final word is ha, and H-A, ha, as in Hawaii, or mahalo, and aloha. Ha is breath of life, but it is life-giving breath. Life-giving breath, the breath that gives life to the words that are coming out of our mouths right now. Every time I utter a sound, I'm giving life to that sound. And if it's attached to a thought and an emotion, I then give life to that thought and an emotion. But once it leaves my mouth, it becomes something in the world that I no longer have any influence or control over. So be careful of what you say. Be careful of what you think and what you feel, because they manifest. So aloha is a manifestation of us coming together face to face, eye to eye, heart to heart, gut to gut, and being able to look at one another and say aloha. And aloha is that we are joined now in the face of God, in the face of humanity, in the face that makes us one. And in that commitment of saying aloha, I care for this air, I care for this space, I care for you in the time that we are together. And my promise, my commitment is not to damage that air that we share, because in the process of damaging your air, I damage my own and my family, my community. Yeah? So when you say aloha, it's a commitment to that caring, the commitment to caring capacity, not carrying capacity. Now, if we can't make that commitment when you greet somebody, then yes, just say hi.
Then you know where you stand right there. I'm like, huh.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I know whether or not this guy's committed or not. Right? I shouldn't expect anything more than a passing by, hi, hello, goodbye. But when someone says aloha, well, okay, now there's something here that, okay, I need to be a little more mindful about this relationship.
Yeah, I've always been so intrigued, and we've talked about this before. I mean, my great-grandparents immigrated to Oahu from Portugal, and
that's right.
And so I've always felt this really deep connection with Hawaii, even from being a little girl. And I find the language to be just so beautiful, and there's so much meaning behind what is said. It's people say hi, it's like, oh, hi, and there's lots of, it's just kind of like, oh, whatever. But with aloha, there's really a deeper meaning and a deeper sense that goes with it.
Yeah, well, we're hoping more people will recognize that. Because otherwise, just say hi. It's not just a differentiator, right, that you're in Hawaii now.
Yeah, it's not just a slogan on a shirt that you buy at one of the stores.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And as I say that about aloha, I like to say that about arigato or any other cultural language that is rooted in relationships, right, and not just labels. I really believe that there's a different energy in a label than there is in a name. The name has meaning, and if we trace the roots of those names, they influence who we are and those that we give the names to. And as much as a name could eventually just become a label, which has no energy really behind it, then I think we need to pay respect to the names that we are given and we give others. And therefore honor the language, honor where those places come from. So we're in a world that is becoming quickly unified by marketing or by systems like Skype, we can talk to everybody around the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's a wonderful time. This is clearly one of the greatest times of unification, or as some would say, connection. And yet that very technology is becoming the source of divisiveness as well, because we're not mindful of the words we use when we go on social media and other things. We just start saying stuff, not realizing that, as Hawaiians would say, words give life and words take life. And we've now seen that happen where people are using words to take the lives of others. So, like everything else, it's about balance. There's a give and there's a take. And how do we find that balance? And we just have to be very mindful that when I give life to the words that come out of my mouth, I could also easily take the life of someone else. To be mindful.
The Hawaiian language, I feel, is so poetic. I mean, it has so much, to me, it has so much soul in all of the words that are spoken.
Yeah.
So,
and I think it's because it's rooted in soul, or maybe I should say rooted in spirit.
Yeah.
So as a consequence, if it's used properly, hopefully it moves people properly. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Well, yeah, and thank you, Ramsay. I mean, it's always such a joy to spend this time with you, and I'm so delighted we're going to be doing, having an interview with you for the next few months going forward, and hopefully, indefinitely. I really find the words of wisdom that you have to be, it really transcends culture and any ideology that people think they may have learned. It really is timeless information. So thank you.
No, thank you for the opportunity. Really, I do agree. We're all islanders. We all live in the island Earth. If we can find a way to live better and take care of our places respectively, wherever they are on this island called Earth, then like the reef, hopefully we'll be healthy.
Hey, and that's what we're looking for, is more harmony and more unity. So,
absolutely.
Oh, well, we are going to go ahead and take a break here. I know that we've got our links for people to connect with you that will be with this, so that they can connect with you on Facebook. And is there any other place that they should connect with you on?
RamsayTaum.com should be active and live. So they can go there and there'll be some information on classes and ways to reach me, speaking opportunities if they're interested, things like that. But that's another place to connect. But Facebook is a good place.
And I know they can also look at the overwhelming array of YouTube videos of speeches that you've given to different organizations, unity churches, and civic groups, just in regards to different topics that relate to Hawaiian wisdom and your own personal insights. So
yeah, I've been very fortunate to have been able to share it with in different venues, but I like to think there's something common about them all. And aside from just me, but that there is a common thread, an underlying concept, and that is about aloha, how we treat one another and our places. So whether it's on sustainability or if it's on energy, renewable energy, or whether it's about community capacity building, I'd like to think that those messages will resonate with anyone interested in those areas. So that's another place. Absolutely. YouTube is another great tool.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ramsay, and we will be chatting with you next month, and I can't wait to hear what we're going to talk about next.
Thanks, Marianne. This is always fun. I really appreciate it.
Well, that's the end of our time today. You've been listening to Kumu Ramsay Taum. I highly suggest you search him out on YouTube and be part of his community on Facebook. He's got some insights that will bring you to a whole new perspective. So you've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.